catch up with loved ones, or maybe even binging on our favorite shows during lockdowns. We're all watching screens a lot more. But what is all of this screen time doing to our brains? And could the impacts be long-lasting, especially for kids?
A child born in 2007 will never know a world without smartphones. Then you add in the time spent in front of TVs, tablets, computers, and you can see how quickly those screen time hours add up. Well, now researchers want to know how all of this screen time is affecting the brains of our children.
At the end of the day, we're social animals, and I think it's easy in our theoretical thinking to abstract that away. But that's such a fundamental part of who we are. Smartphones that we could primarily be taking photos, and then the mobile networks got good, so then you could be kind of sharing video, and video is a lot richer, and consuming video is a better experience. I just don't think that's the end of the line. I think it gets more immersive.
That delay leaves researchers who study technology's impact on very small children anxious.
In many ways, the concern that investigators like I have is that we're sort of in the midst of a natural, kind of uncontrolled experiment on the next generation of children.
What do you think kids should be studying these days?
Resilience, adaptability, a high rate of learning, creativity, certainly familiarity with the tools. Certainly familiarity with the tools.
There always seems to be this, like, think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society.
What about the children?
Music, particularly among adolescents, is a very powerful motivator of behavior. It wasn't so long ago that an entire war was turned on the basis of youth music with Vietnam. And music was really central to the counterculture and the culture that rose up and said, we're not going to take this anymore. I don't think we should underestimate the power of music, because music touches the limbic system, or the emotional system of our brain, which actually, though slower than other parts, can overwhelm all of the other parts. Think about how we lose our mind when we fall in love, and we literally do, because of the power of the emotion. That being said, the music system has been very unresponsive even to industry-applied ratings. All that they had been willing to do was to put parental advisory on the outside of CDs. We can't expect a system to be put together that will perfectly protect us. We need to protect ourselves. We need to be aware that these media change us and affect us. And we need to actively understand what they're doing, how they're doing, and make choices of whether we want that to be done to us.
Thing about a lot of these arguments and takes that there sort of seems to be this greater obsession, and this is like always the narrative, even going back to when I was younger, and I remember like rock bands being on trial for saying crazy stuff in their lyrics or something like that. There always seems to be this, like, think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. And this has been the pitch for how many decades now, for how many generations? Like, when is the downfall happening? Because all of these people sort of seem to be referencing back to a time when, well, back then the downfall was happening too. Like, we were in the middle of the downfall then too. Like, we're making America great again to make it the time when we were also talking about the downfall happening. It's like we're always in this moment where the sky is falling. And I don't know, it's sort of like it's just new to some people for some reason, or they're just not kind of getting hip to the fact that none of this is new, or it's just like old, like, playing with the kind of imagery that you're playing with. Rock bands have been doing that since like forever. Why can't a rapper do it? Why can't you do it without making the point that you're trying to make?
The sheer number of articles and papers and internet posts published daily comparing then and now, both sincerely and ironically, is astonishing. We can't seem to get enough about kids these days and just how different and awesome it was to be a kid back in the good old days. George Orwell put it well. Every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it. There's a name for this sentiment: juvenoia. It means an exaggerated fear about the things that influence kids these days. Juvenoia is a concerned disappointment that because of iPhones, or the internet, or TV, or rock music, or those pesky horseless carriages, the world just isn't fit for kids. like it used to be. This constant cycle of generation clashing can sometimes sound like a broken record. Are these commentaries really providing insight into the minds of future leaders, or prematurely judging a coeval based on how it acts as teens? Despite the incessant concerns otherwise, the proverbial kids these days seem to be better off than ever before. Drug use is down, exercising is up, math and writing proficiency have increased, crimes committed by young people have decreased, hate comments reported by children have dropped, the number of 9th to 12th graders who have been in fights has dropped, and the number of teens who fear attacks at school has dropped. But still, juvenoia persists.
Back in 2017, when she published iGen, a book that also made the argument that spikes in teenage depression could be linked to smartphones and social media.
It is 7 years later, and we have a lot more data, and teen depression has continued to go up, and still we need to wait? What are we going to wait for? Teen depression is now at 20%. Should we wait until it's half? Should we wait until it's a third?
95% of American teenagers now have access to smartphones, and about a third of them report being on social media almost constantly.
Especially with what's coming. Change is a warning of what's coming.
What's coming, Barry?
Technology.
It is clear America is undergoing a current crisis. And no, I am not referring to the crisis of the current pseudo-scientific biological variety, manufactured and fabricated via mainstream media and the medical industry complex. I am referring to our current crisis of meaning and identity. Moral decay, social media, and the attention economy have systematically destroyed our ability to make value judgments and know ourselves, in turn creating mass disillusionment and a disconnect in how we as humans relate. Prior to this technological boom, this massive social crisis has been in development since the end of World War II, and has gone on to sear the consciences of impressionable youth since the counterculture of the 60s. But technology, and even culture, is incomplete without its muse, its sensual messenger, or music. We discover intellectual dishonesty and deception when individuals downplay the influence of music on its audience. As Plato believed far before music had an industry, nor a speaker through which to hear it, music is indeed an opiate of the masses. Sarah Whitfield accurately describes his perspective in her 2010 work, Music, Its Expressive Power and Moral Significance. She states, Plato assumed that music's expressive character resembled certain aspects of the inner life and pointed to higher spiritual realities. Plato acknowledged the innate psychological and spiritual nature of music, and concluded that because music could arouse and habituate particular emotions, it could also shape the character of its listener. She continues to describe the nature of music as persuasive and how it can shape the thoughts and emotions of its audience. Because music was primarily imitative, it mirrored man's sensual and intellectual life. Music could shape thought, action, and perception in powerful ways to which most people were oblivious. The power of its medium, social media, that has today rearranged our reality, reconstructed our ability to relate to one another, and revolutionized our connection to culture. The building block of any civilization and society.
School cell phone bans are becoming more common across the nation. Last year, Florida became the first to enact statewide phone bans during class at public schools. Several other states are considering taking similar action.
Academic achievement has been going down, not since COVID, but since 2012. As soon as the kids all had the internet in their pocket, they can't resist. They have to be using it.
Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, has been near the top of bestseller lists for months, stoking debate around how smartphones and social media are, in his words, rewiring childhood, and largely to blame for the youth mental health crisis.
This is the first time that a generation has faced a threat entirely on social media. There is direct correlational evidence that the more you use it, the more depressed you are. It's especially heavy users, more than 4 hours a day. Those girls are 3 times more likely to be depressed than medium users. So it's anxiety and depression, also self-harm and suicide. All of those things skyrocket after 2012.
Art of the past and other eras in history did not have the all-encompassing influence of social media as a machine of enculturation, an influence that transmutes culture into a plastic, a substance of the unnatural, a type of anti-nature that lacks substance. Turning art into a meme and man into a product. Think about it.
Well, in the year 2000, I think I'll probably be the spaceship to the moon dictating robots to robots, or else I may be, I don't know, in charge of a robot court, judging some robots, or I may be at the funeral of a computer.
I think it's going to be very boring, and everything will be the same. I mean, people will be the same, and things will be the same.
I think it'll be people will be regarded more as statistics than as actual people.
I'm not looking forward to living in that year, about 50 years' time. I mean, the world seems to be in such a terrible state now, let alone in 50 years' time.
I think we're moving toward a world where all the consumers under a certain age would probably tend to identify more with their consumer status or with the products they consume than they would with any sort of antiquated notion of nationality. We're increasingly sort of interchangeable.
That there always seems to be this like, think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. And this has been the pitch for how many decades now, for how many generations? Like, when is the downfall happening?
Apparently, Fontano cannot put the point into its proper perspective. No prior era can be compared to ours of today in such a way. If our society of the past was founded on a set of principles, values, and structures, giving us the foundation on which our society is grounded today, and these things suddenly and in short order were destroyed and removed without significant structures to replace them, how would our society avoid falling down without a stable structure to keep it standing?
Very considerably, I think. Aristotle begins or near the beginning of his discussion of ethics, says you ought to pray that you're born into a good society, because if you're not, your chances of doing well, either as a human person or as a philosopher doing ethics, are pretty slender. It's not, of course, impossible. There can be conversion. But it's very hard. So we have to hope that our culture is basically sound. Now we know our culture is in many respects, now in many basic respects, unsound, but it's got sound aspects of it too. And then we can say Christian culture, the culture of the Christian community within the wider culture, which was once much more dominantly shaped by the Christian culture and Christian community. The Christian community's culture is fundamentally sound. We've got a built-in critique of the wider culture, and we shouldn't be ashamed to draw the distinction between the two and work with that critically.
You cannot compare the minds, modes, and mores of the classic or industrial age to that of the information age with such a broad brush. Not only has our culture changed, but even the wiring of our brains and forms of interaction have been uprooted.
Dr. Nahal Parikh is leading the study looking at the brains of premature babies from birth through childhood to understand how they're affected by different risk factors, including exposure to screens. What does this image tell you?
It tells us a lot when we correlate it with these exposures such as screen time, and we correlate it with development. It tells us whether or not those things are having an impact.
Do you think there's a difference in TV screen time, like what we had growing up, and what they're exposed to on phones or iPads?
Phones and iPads so much more engaging for
children, and especially if they can control it, so it's easier for them to just zone out.
Dr. John Hutton is at the forefront of this fast-developing field, and he's published several studies that already suggest higher levels of screen time can impact a child's growth. One result that keeps showing up, parts of the brain related to reading, language, and decision-making are often weaker in kids who have more screen time.
When will you have the answers that you're searching for?
Some questions we'll be able to answer in a few years, but some of the really interesting questions about these long-term outcomes, we're going to have to wait a while because they need to happen.
In many ways, the concern that investigators like I have is that we're sort of in the midst of a natural, kind of uncontrolled experiment on the next generation of children. What we do know about babies playing with iPads is that they don't transfer what they learn from the iPad to the real world, which is to say that if you give a child an app where they play with virtual Legos, virtual blocks, and stack them, and then put real blocks in front of them, they start all over.
If they try to do it in real life, it's as if they've never done it before.
Exactly. They don't
so it's not a transferable skill.
They don't transfer the knowledge from 2 dimensions to 3.
Evidence continues to prove that this change is significantly negative and presents credible examples of sociological, economical, biological, psychological, spiritual, and yes, societal downfall.
Comments might be strong, but it's how I genuinely feel. I don't care that you're a Christian. I don't care what the Bible says. Like, I feel like it's a clown show, like sitting here trying to decipher what your little mythical book has to say about these very real political issues, right? I don't care about your goddamn religion. I'm so tired of having nonstop conversations about what the Bible says. You live your life in the way that you interpret the Bible. Again, I don't care, but you don't get to take the Bible and tell me, well, the Bible says this in this chapter, in this verse. I don't care. I don't care.
It's always a finger pointed at weak conservatism or churchianity as straw man targets that obscure the importance of basic morality and the social responsibility to children's psychosocial development. Also, you will find the postmodern blending of childlike freedom and irresponsibility with the role played by the adult in society. The role of the child and the role of the adult have merged, so to speak. Or we could say the difference between maturity and immaturity has vanished. Culture today appeals to the kidult spectrum, whereby children are treated and considered as eligible adults, and adults by age are described by eternal youth free from any binding responsibility or standard of maturity. Interestingly, the bedrock of a grown adult is responsibility, maturity, and of course wisdom. Yet these ideals are no longer practiced, valued, nor encouraged today. The kidult wants to be a child, and they destroy authentic children by forcing them to grow up faster than their developmental stages naturally allow. Foregoing their role as guidance and protection, postmodern adults revert to childlike behavior, embellishing their rights to ignorance and irresponsibility as an expression of liberation, leaving the next generations in the dust, bereft of structure, stability, and know-how, freed up to become food for the virtual machine, the new parent and god of postmodern man. What sets apart musical influence of this age from, say, those of the past, as Fontano attempts to equivocate, is the specialized technologies and their dynamics within the culture of the information age. The industrial age, musical influence pales in comparison. Let me explain. Music today is designed, driven, and administered in ways that cannot be matched anywhere in history. 4, but not limited to, key factors exist. The internet, providing ubiquity and global connectivity. Social media, providing automated enclaves of culture that inform, communicate, and build upon themselves in rapid succession, changing minds and masses of people within hours, even minutes. Smart devices, providing instantaneous contact and promotion of ideas and culture to every person in milliseconds, 24 hours a day, every single day of roughly every single person's life. Lastly, as Sherry Turkle would describe, all of this creates the universal tethered experience for all society. A hyperconnectivity to a virtual world that is constantly changing and signaling, while simultaneously significantly detaching and disconnecting us from the material world more and more, whereby our physical reality battles for attention under the predominance of a virtual one, further detaching us from the physical world of relationships, even our own bodies. This conflict destabilizes the human field of communication, as well as our ability to function in reality or understand what reality truly is. Reality has now become meta. We now operate in a plural reality. This human interactive and hypoactive experience is unprecedented, unmatched, and literally unheard of in any prior historical context.
What about the children?
We can address the four-factor model and its effect on children. Firstly, by recognizing the nature of smart technology, the internet, social media, and the tethered experience as a hindrance on parents. As a result, this dynamic creates an additional barrier, one between the child and its caretakers, guardians, and sources of guidance. Here we find children battling technology for the attention of their parents as well. But then to add the fact that these very parents also practice a new libertine culture that denies the building blocks of adulthood, making the entire situation much worse and increases its toxicity.
We're increasingly sort of interchangeable.
Howard Gardner and Katie Davis, in their work, The App Generation, describe a new 21st century whatever generation, doomed by the uncertainty of a dwindling future, anxiety-laden and driven by a desire to feel nothing. Or Eli Pariser's point about generations of today being stuck in the filter bubble, whereby their identities and perspectives are mere products of generated ideas and images filtered through algorithms, completely out of touch with the real material world. App-dependent, codependent, ADD, and depersonalization is more common than intimacy and integrity, anxious and addicted to online pornography and attention. The modern generations are beyond delusional at this point, becoming more machine-like and human-seeming than authentically human. We as a society are losing touch with reality and are dependent on computer-generated versions of one. Health of all sorts are in decline and relationships are becoming more and more disconnected or rare. Marriage and birth rates have reversed, and we are at a point of self-depopulating behavior by technologically induced instinct. We are gambling with our future. With technology as pilot, we sit in the backseat drunk, handing over the keys to our designated driver. We willingly commit sociocide for the grips of distraction, emotional gratification in pursuits of pure pleasure. We have become robots that live through reacting to technological notification and upkeep. Our points of view are products of artificial intelligence, ironically, turning us into the true artificially intelligent. We are the AI, compelled and influenced by market-driven forces rooted in narcissism. Lash was correct when he predicted the forming of the culture of narcissism in 1979. For a trinket, a trend, or a big O, we frolic in the abyss, at the expense of our society's structural and mental stability. The likes of Fontano and Montero basically respond with the postmodern glib of the masses. Just let it happen. To their soon dismay, they will discover that all civilizations require rules, limitations, checks and balances to function with stability. And yes, that includes the arts. Scripture makes this clear. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. Even Plato has geared the rationalist with similar knowledge, yet we refuse to listen. The stiff-necked and stubborn in heart and ears forever resisting the truth for a lie. Fontano asks, "Oh, but what downfall do you speak of?" Seeking a conspicuous sign, they look around and claim there is no downfall because the sky is not literally falling on top of them. Their spoiled eyes cannot see that it is crumbling incrementally and has been for generations. The process is too slow and systematic for them to notice, like the dance a growing flower makes during its growth process. This generation only lives, feels, and sees in extremes. If it is not extreme, blasted across social media, bloody, filled with veins, morbid and sexualized, viral and on repeat by the milliminute, no one notices, and it simply does not exist. It's almost as if these industry types live in their own false reality or filter bubble, a hyper-reality in fact, where only their solipsistic version of the world exists. One where anything can be labeled as art, and art is life. Yet no one seems to pick up on the elephant in the room quietly in the corner whispering, "Life imitates art." Or to put it simple, art creates culture, and culture informs life. But what if the art expresses messages detrimental to the development of young minds? And these new messages now have a new technological medium from which to project their sting, latching itself onto every mind in every quarter in a fashion unknown to the history of man, preemptively altering future generations and the culture that gives them structure. Could this type of neurotic art be an unwanted visitor during an era of blatant meaning decay and crisis of identity?
Well, as to whether it's actually going to happen, that's the choice that humanity has to make. We can decide not to do it, but we can also decide to do it because the technology is there.